3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps Book 3. One Step for 1,000 Kalpas. Chapter 2. By Tangqi. Chapter 2. After that, another 2,557 years passed, and it was the 29,993rd year of Zhu Ti's sleep. Before Zhu Ti fell asleep, she said that she would wake up 30,000 years later with the coming of the great catastrophe that would overturn the world and destroy all the wastelands. Now, there are only 7 years left before the 30,000-year period she mentioned, and the time is already very close. Because when she first made the prophecy, Zhu Ti did not see the reason for the great catastrophe, so the divine envoys in Gugu were also at a loss. For many years, they just stayed in Gugu, passively waiting for the prophecy. Once the day comes, nothing more can be done. However, for more than 20,000 and nearly 30,000 years, nothing major happened in the 8 wastes that could be related to that calamity. As an envoy of God, it is naturally impossible to doubt the prophecy of the God Lord. As the leader of the 4 divine envoys, Lin's judgment is that since the 30,000-year period is approaching, it is time to show signs of the great catastrophe. Although Bahuang appears to be fine on the surface, he does not know that there is no change. Dark place? Lin was very capable of action. Shortly after making this judgment, he successively arranged for 3 divine envoys to go out of the mountain, asking them to go deep into various tribes and inquire about the strange things in the 8 wastelands. I don't know whether it was his premonition that was accurate or just luck. The next month after the 3 divine envoys came out of the mountain one after another, a major event happened in the 8 wastelands that shocked the world and shocked the world. The missing man who had been missing for 240,000 years. The dark demon Lord Qingjiang has returned. This news reached the ears of the goddess Gugu, and they immediately understood that this was the strange thing they had been waiting for, and they also realized who would be the instigator of the catastrophe predicted by Zhu Ti. However, Zhu Ti was still awake, and it was inconvenient for the envoys to act rashly. Therefore, after some discussion, the 4 envoys simply conveyed the news to Emperor Donghua in Taichun Palace, then returned to the mountain and closed the girl's house again. As soon as Gugu was closed, for years passed by in a flash. Shuanghe reviewed this morning many times later and always felt that it was no different from the countless mornings Gugu had experienced in the past. Early that morning, Lin and Zhao Shi went to the Chongqing Sea to meditate and practice. Shui Yi went to the alchemy room. He had a restless temper. He didn't want to meditate with Lin, nor did he want to go to the alchemy room and be used as a handyman by Shui Yi, so he went to Lan cave and wanted to practice his sword there. As a result, when he was about to start practicing, he found that the rope on the handle of the knife was loose. He sat on the ground on a piece of grass next to the hole, lowered his head, and picked up the rope on the knife. He was clumsy and couldn't get it right after a long time. Just when he was about to get angry, a hand suddenly stretched out from beside him. "Let me help you take a look." He was startled, and when he raised his head, he found someone sitting next to him. The man smiled at him, and he was shocked and rubbed his eyes. The man looked at him looking stupid, shrugged without saying anything, took his beloved purple stone twill knife from his hand, lowered his head, and deftly helped him knit the loose knife rope. He stared at the man and opened his mouth several times before he could successfully say the words choked in his throat. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, are you awake?" The man raised his head and smiled at him, then put the purple stone twill knife back into his hand. I'm awake," she said. It was such an ordinary morning that could not find any bright spots in Shuanghe's many reviews afterwards. Zhu Ti woke up early from her scheduled 30,000-year slumber. She walked out of Lan cave and saw Shuanghe who was clumsily struggling with the knife rope. She walked over and sat next to him and kindly reached out to help him. Just like more than 200,000 years ago, Ruamu Gate had not yet opened. Open it, she has not yet sacrificed for the human race. They live peacefully in Gugu, as she would do when she sees Shuanghe's knife rope loose. This made Shuanghe a little confused. Just when Shuanghe was in a daze, Zudi asked him, "Have you seen my mask?" Shuanghe didn't hear what she was saying at all. His eyes were fixed on her face, and he was a little shocked that this face was no different from when he first saw her in Dian Mountain 300,000 years ago. At that time, she had just turned 35,000 years old and was not yet an adult. She had the appearance of a mortal in her mid-50s, but she had not yet fully grown up, but her face was already ridiculously good-looking. He was enlightened by her and followed her back to Gugue Mountain. Looking at her face every day, he could eat 2 more bowls of rice. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. It wasn't long before she met Bien Rong. After that, she put on a mask, and he never saw her face again. Unexpectedly, hundreds of thousands of years have passed, and their 4 goddesses have lost their youth and grown from teenagers to young adults. However, as their divine master, she still maintains her innocent and beautiful youthful appearance. Shuangde was speechless. Zhu Ti looked at him for a while, then gently held his right arm and pressed it lightly. Shuanghe, I'm asking you something. Shuanghe finally came to his senses. The mask. Of course he remembered the complicated sapphire mask that she had worn on her face since she met Bei Rong and never took it off. But after Zudi returned 30,000 years ago, when he rushed back to Gugu, she had already entered Lanin Cave. He had not seen her face at all, let alone where her mask had gone. But secretly he felt it was better for her not to wear a mask. Shuanghe sat cross-legged on the ground, looking at Zhu Ti with a look of surprise and confusion. I don't know, Your Majesty. You may have to ask Yin Lin about the mask, because he was the only one. Who came with you that day when you fell asleep? By your side, we are all outside the cave. When he mentioned Yin Lin, he remembered that he had to inform Yin Lin that Zudi had woken up, while muttering, Your Majesty, I don't know how happy Yin Lin and the others will be when you wake up. I have to go quickly inform them. He stood up hastily. But he was stopped by Zhu Ti. As if she didn't think it was a big deal that she had been sleeping for 29,997 years, and that it was such a big deal to wake up, she pulled out a dogtail grass and played with it. No hurry, let's talk first. I have something to ask you. She hesitated for a moment, looking a little weird, as if she wanted to know the answer, but was also afraid of knowing the answer. How's Zongrong? Are you still sleeping in the tomb? After Zhu Ti woke up, the first question she asked was where her mask had gone. The first person she cared about was Bien Rong. This made Shuanghe, who was holding her breath and holding her heart, a little at a loss. She paused for a while before reacting. Come over. Bien Rong, are you asking for Bo Rong? Oh, Bo Rong, she is fine. She has been sleeping well in Jizhong. I even went to the cave where she slept to take a look at her last year, and she was sleeping soundly. Really? Zhu Ti's slightly frowned eyebrows relaxed, and she smiled. That's good. She sighed a little. It's been 240,000 years. She has been sleeping in the tomb for so long, so she deserves it. Wake up. As he spoke, a white jade bottle appeared. He bit his fingertip and dropped a drop of blood into the bottle. He sealed the jade bottle with his fingers and handed it over. You can find time to take this with you later. Go to Jizhong with a drop of blood to wake her up. She will be happy to know that I am back. After saying these words, she stood up, and Shuanghe also stood up. According to past experience, this was considered to be the end of the serious conversation. Shuanghe was thinking about whether he should accompany her to find Yin Lin in the Sea of Eternal Life when Zhu Ti, who was walking in front, suddenly turned around. She faced him with a somewhat careless expression, as if she suddenly remembered, and asked, By the way, who did you think I was going to tell you just now? There was something wrong in his heart, but Shuanghe reacted very quickly. He immediately understood what Zhu Ti meant, and his scalp suddenly became numb. Zhu Ti was right. When she said she wanted to ask Shuanghe something, Shuanghe did not expect that she would ask Bien Rong. He thought she would ask Liansong. And when she showed that kind of expression that resembled the timidity of a country girl who wanted to know the answer, but was afraid of knowing the answer, Shuanghe really thought that Yin Lin's worries had come true. Before falling into a deep sleep, their lord had not successfully peeled off. Even though she lost her memory of the water god, she still remembered him. At that moment, Xuanghe simply felt desperate, and a line of big words floated in his mind. The water god has forgotten our lord, but our lord actually still remembers him. It's over, it's over. What kind of human drama is this? Oh, drama means tragedy. Because Xuanghe is not very literate and cannot write the word miserable, the bold word miserable in his mind is replaced by a bold circle. Human drama. Human tragedy. This line of words floated in Xuanghe's mind almost 20 times before Zudi opened his mouth. He didn't expect that she was asking about Zhong Rong. To be honest, the relationship between Xuanghe and Bo Rong was just like that. When they were together in Gugu more than 200,000 years ago, the two of them had a small quarrel every 3 days, a major quarrel every 7 days, and would fight each other every half-month. So Xuanghe was definitely not happy to hear that Zhu Ti cared about Zhong Rong, but he was relieved. It was a real relief. When Zhu Ti woke up, the one she cared about most was Xin Rong, so she must have forgotten about the water god. This was his mental journey at the time. He felt that although he was frightened inside, his face was very calm, and he couldn't figure out why Zhu Ti could see it. But Zhu Ti saw it after all. He had to cover up. So, he smiled in a subtle way. No one, I just thought you wanted to talk to me about Bairong. Haha. Zhu Ti sighed softly. We haven't seen each other for more than 200,000 years. I didn't expect that Xuang and you would also learn to lie, and even said it quite like that. She didn't blame him. She even smiled, and then said, "This is not good." But this sentence was enough for Xuanghe. He immediately froze. Am I not good enough? He asked blankly. Since being enlightened by Zhu Ti, Xuanghe has set the ultimate goal of his divine life to be a good messenger who satisfies the God Lord, and has been striving towards this goal. In the past tens of thousands of years, Zhu Ti had always thought that he was very good, and he had always been proud of it. But just now, Zhu Ti said that he was not very good, and Xuanghe's sky fell. If the sky falls, he won't be able to keep any secrets. I thought you would ask the water god. Hearing this name, Zhu Ti slowly opened her eyes. Water god, she asked. Do you mean the water god? She asked twice. Xuanghe nodded bravely and said yes. Zhu Ti frowned slightly, as if thinking. Then she raised her head and looked at Xuanghe. Why do you think I would talk to you about the water god? She paused, with doubts in her eyes, maybe because of reincarnation and falling asleep again. The past, I can't remember many things clearly. Could it be that in the past that I can't remember clearly, the water god was born and had some important interactions with me? Xuanghe's heart thumped. He is simple, big-hearted, and may not be very smart, but he is not stupid. Judging from Zhu Ti's reaction, she really forgot about the water god, but thanks to him, she seemed to be interested in him again after completely forgetting about the water god. Xuanghe simply wanted to die. She has always loved Hui. What should he say to make her believe that she actually has no special relationship with the water god? Although she is naive, she is extremely difficult to deceive. The only person among the girls who can deceive her is Shui. Is it too late for him to bring Shui in as a reinforcement at this time? Just as frost and sweat were pouring down like rain, the voice of Shui that he was chanting unexpectedly interrupted at the right time. In the prehistoric era, among the 5 nature gods, only the water god has not yet been born. Before the door of Ruamu opens, Your Majesty. Don't you think about this all the time? Xuanghe looked up and saw Shui coming with Yin Lin and Zhao Shi. 3 feet away, the 3 of them stood still and bowed to Zhu Ti. Xuanghe then remembered that he had not worshipped the God Lord yet, and quickly followed everyone in worshipping him. Although he bowed and worshipped, his eyes could not leave Zhu Ti's face. Then he saw their God Lord smiled slightly, and his white jade hands came out of Lu Yunguang's sleeves. A little, and pressed down slightly, which was her usual action, to let them off the hook. Then she looked at Shui, as if she was curious. Was I looking forward to the birth of the water god at that time? But also seemed to be disappointed. I don't remember anything about it. Seeing Zhu Ti's reaction, Xuanghe immediately became nervous. But Shui was indeed the king of serious nonsense. He didn't show any signs of nervousness, and the expression on his face seemed to be the most sincere in all the world. After all, it was a long time ago. "That's it," Shui said with a smile. "In addition, after your Majesty's soul was resurrected from the light, it entered the reincarnation of the mortal world. Reincarnation is a grinding process, so it's normal for your Majesty not to remember some unimportant past events. But at the time, your Majesty, we all saw the expectation for the birth of the water god, and he remembered it in his heart. The water god was finally born 70,000 years ago. He probably thought that you might care about this matter, so he thought you would ask about the water god." After saying this, he smiled helplessly. Shuang and him are like this. They can't hide things in their hearts, and you know it very well, your Majesty. He admired Shui so much. He talked nonsense so sincerely and logically that he was stunned for a moment. He even believed it. He remembered that Zhu Ti expected the water god to be born, so he thought that Zhu Ti would take the initiative to accompany him. He mentioned the water god. Fortunately, Zhu Ti also believed it with a look of realization on her face, so that's it. She mused. She lowered her eyes and recalled for a moment. Then she said to Yinlin and Zhao Shi, who had been silently aside, "I seem to have remembered that I should have been looking forward to the birth of the water god," and smiled again. "By the way, did I also make him a rattle and give it to him when he is born?" Yinlin was silent for a moment and did not answer immediately. Zhao Shi glanced at Yinlin and said, "First, I have not been following your Majesty for as long as Yinlin, and I don't know about the rattle. If your Majesty had given this thing to the water god a long time ago, then maybe Yinlin knows." After saying this, he glanced at Yinlin first, and then glanced at Shui with his eyes. Except for Shuanghe, who is not very smart, the other three have always had a tacit understanding. Everyone knows that Zhao Shi's words and the two subsequent looks are to hope that Yinlin will perform well. If he does not perform well, Shui can help him realize his lie in time. Yinlin looked back at Zhao Shi. He did know something about the rattle. He was the first divine messenger enlightened by Zhu Ti, and he accompanied her when she just turned 20,000 years old. At that time, Zhu Ti had no emotions or desires. Although she looked quiet and cold, she was actually extremely naive and often behaved childishly. There is an old sandalwood tree in Guyu Mountain, which had taken root on the shore of the Sea of Eternal Life before Zhu Ti was born. Sometimes she would tell him about Zhu Ti's childhood. It is said that when Zhu Ti was more than 7,000 years old, she had a precognitive dream one night and foresaw that the god of fire was about to come to the world. So the next day she went to the back mountain, found a kind of beautiful jade, and told Lao Tangsha that she was going to make only the rattle was given to the god of fire as a birthday gift. At that time, Zhu Ti didn't actually understand what this so-called friendship was. It was just because when she was born, the mother goddess came to Gugu and gave her a 9-link ring, which was the first natural god in the world, Nuwa. It was a birthday gift that God made with his own hands before falling asleep due to mending the sky. After getting the 9-link ring, little Ziti spontaneously came up with the idea of making an interesting little thing to give to future generations of nature gods to celebrate their birth. Not long after making the rattle, Lao Tangshu accompanied Zhu Ti out of Zhengzhe for the first time to visit Xieming. Next to Shao Heyuan in the southern wilderness, they saw the little fire god Xieming being held in the arms of Lord of Wind Sergia. The quiet little girl looked at Ziti curiously with her big black eyes. Zhu Ti shook the red rattle to entertain the little girl. After teasing for a while, she raised her head and asked Sergia curiously, "4 of the 5 nature gods have been born, and only the water god has not yet been born. Does Brother Sergia know that the water god will be born? When was he born?" The little Semming with big eyes in Sergia's arms immediately stretched out his hand to hit the rattle in front of him and hummed twice. Sergia stroked the little girl's forehead in a funny way and looked at Ziti. "You can't scream, my brother. She will be angry." He added, "You're the god of foreknowledge. Even you cannot know when the water god will be born, let alone me." Hearing Sergia's answer, Ziti sighed in disappointment. "I have never had a prophetic dream about the water god." After thinking about it, but I think he will be born soon, and asked innocently Sijia, I'm wondering if I should make a rattle for the water god, brother Sijia. Seeing little Xieming frowning with her quiet eyebrows and reaching out to play the rattle again, she immediately changed her mind. Sijia. He also took 2 steps back and asked Sijia from a long distance away, you said I made a blue rattle for the water god, would he like it? At that time, Sijia was only over 20,000 years old and still had a sense of playfulness. Hearing this, she really thought about her proposal and then answered her question solemnly, who doesn't like rattles? Children all love them. I like it. As she said this, she took the red rattle from her hand, lowered her head and gently teased little Xieming in her arms. Xiao Xieming yawned and smiled at Sijia to show off her face. After going to Xiao Heyuan to deliver the gifts, Lao Tangshu accompanied Zhu Ti back to Guyu. Soon after returning to Gugu, Zudi made a blue rattle. That should be the initial connection between Zhu Ti and Liansong. After Yinlin became Gu's envoy, Linglu Cave, the cave where Zhu Ti kept his things, came under his control. He had seen that rattle, with a sapphire hoop, a tooth-white drum head, and 2 round black clam beads falling on the drum handle. It was very childlike and delicate. But Yinlin never asked Zhu Ti about the rattle. The first time Zhu Ti mentioned the water god in front of Yinlin was when she was approaching her 40,000th year of adulthood. She had a prophetic dream about the water god. In that dream, she foresaw the immortal fate between the god who would be born more than 200,000 years later and her. Then, in the long dream about the water god that lasted for tens of thousands of years, she almost blurred the dream and reality. The water god is no longer a simple companion of the god of nature in her heart, he has become the most special person to her. Of course, she could no longer celebrate the birth of the water god with a simple, childish gift like a rattle. Yinlin remembered that it was 240,000 years ago, on the eve of the Ruomu Gate opening. Shawanshan, the last creation god in the world, finally learned of his fate and came to Gugu to seek help from Zhu Ti, hoping that she could help her open the Ruoma Gate and migrate the human race to the mortal world. Zhu Ti agreed to Shawan's request and healed the wound she suffered from being stabbed by poisonous wood while trying to find out how to open the Ruomu Gate. Shawan wanted to repay Zhu Ti and asked her what she wanted. Zhu Ti thought about it for a while and then asked Shawan, I heard from the flowers and trees outside the mountain that as long as the music is on the way, only God Mo Yuan, who is known as the orchid gentleman in the world, can compete with you. Is this true? Xiao Wanjuan's eyebrows were curved. If someone comes to ask me, I will definitely tell them that I was the one who defeated Mo Yuan in all aspects. She got closer to Zhu Ti, but to you, I will naturally tell the truth. Ba'in among them, when it comes to gold, stone, earth and leather, Mo Yuan is not as good as me, but when it comes to silk, wood and bamboo, I am not as good as him. He said with a slight smile, but what do you want to do when you ask me this? The sapphire mask blocked Zhu Ti's expression, and only her voice could be heard, gently, softly, and unhurriedly. I want you to teach me how to make a flute. I want to make a unique flute that is unique in the world. A spiritual flute that can surpass others. This was obviously an answer that was beyond Shawanjan's expectation. She raised her eyebrows. Oh? It should be noted that the spirit flute needs to be matched with everyone. However, as far as I know, Guangshan is not familiar with music, and the whole girl doesn't seem to be particularly knowledgeable. Music man. So, she propped up her chin and looked at Zhu Ti with interest. Why do you want to make such a spiritual flute? Tens of thousands of years of long dreams have allowed Guangshan to understand a little bit about the 7 emotions. Although she understands a little about emotions, it is a very weak and shallow perception. Therefore, she still maintains that childishness and does not know what shyness and embarrassment are. She is very Tell Shawan frankly. The water god, who was born because of the new god era, is very good at playing the flute, but he is picky and has a very high vision. In his generation, no one can make a flute that suits him for him to play. He has always wanted a good spiritual flute. I saw his disappointment, so I wanted to make a flute that suits his taste and give it to him. Shawan sighed greatly. The friendship between you nature gods is really. Zhu Ti interrupted her. He is not an ordinary god of nature. He is a god with whom I have an immortal relationship. Xiaowan. At that time, Yinlin was on one side and witnessed the conversation. Xiaowan was surprised that the ruthless and desireless god of light could be destined to be an immortal. He asked Zhu Ti a few more questions and then agreed to teach her how to make flutes. The two spent 49 days in seclusion in Lanin Cave and made a white jade flute with flowing light, which was later called the Silent Flute. But because Zhu Ti was really good at music theory, so that most of the success of the spiritual flute was due to Xiaowan's efforts, so Zhu Ti didn't feel that this flute was made by her. And she didn't want to be given the false reputation of making the flute, so she guarded the flute as I gave it to Xiaowan and planned to make something else for the water god. But before she could figure out what to do, the time had come for Ruomu's door to open. Yinlin could never forget that time when Zhu Ti sighed with regret, saying that he owed the water god a birthday gift and had to wait until she returned to do something else. She didn't mention the rattle, and Yinlin thought she had forgotten it. Later, on the eve of the opening of the Ruomu door, Zongrong, who had been secretly thinking about the rattle, sneaked into the Linglu cave, stole the rattle, and after the Ruomu door opened, she took it into Zhu Ti's home. In the slumber that she arranged for more than 200,000 years. That's where the drum ended up. Looking back at this point, even if it was Yinlin, he would inevitably feel sad. Zhao, she called him, Yinlin. He just came back to his senses. After coming back to his senses, Yinlin coughed lightly. The passage of more than 300,000 years of world affairs made him feel both vicissitudes of life and sadness. However, he was not a person who was sad for spring and autumn. He immediately calmed down his emotions and solemnly answered his ancestors. T asked about the rattle. Your Majesty made a rattle for the water god at that time. He paused and continued talking nonsense without changing his expression, but the water god has not been born for a long time, and Bo Rong likes that rattle. Gu, you gave it to Zongrong. Shui's eyebrows moved slightly, and she glanced at Yinlin lightly. Yinlin looked back at Shui and continued to look at Zhu Ti without changing his expression. Later, between heaven and earth, there are many important things to be busy with. And your Majesty has no time to think about preparing any other birthday gifts for the water god, so I will put this matter aside and not mention it again. Zhu Ti was startled. Is that so? She tilted her head slightly and whispered, now that I'm back, shouldn't I make up for this gift? There was a bit of ambiguity and uncertainty in her voice, like he was talking to himself, but also seemed to be discussing with them. Yinlin was silent for a moment. He wanted to tell her that there was no need to make up for it, but when he was about to speak, he suddenly remembered that Zhu Ti had mentioned to him for the last time before the Ruomu gate opened, the water god who had not yet been born, but whom she could not let go of. She says, the birthday gift I owe him can only be given to him after I return. Then I will make something that I am good at and that he will also like. There was regret and sadness in the soft sighing voice. Her emotions also contained a weak, barely perceptible, but gentle and moving sense of expectation, as if this was her most yearning wish in the world, and she was eager for it to come true. But who could have expected that when the god of light finally returned and awakened in the new age of gods where the water god was born, the situation between the two would be like this? Yinlin was silent for a while, suppressed his rationality, and replied to Zhu Ti in a low voice, if your Majesty wants to make up for this gift, then let's make up for it. He paused and added softly, your Majesty, you can make something that you are good at and that the water god also likes. Shui glanced at Yinlin in surprise. This time, Yinlin didn't look back at him. Zhu Ti folded her hands and placed her chin on her ice-like fingertips. This is a move that the lively and delicate ancestor of more than 200,000 years ago would not have done. Although the god of light was born in the prehistoric times, she was a prehistoric god, but because her power of foreknowledge consumed her mental power too much, she was a god who often had to sleep for thousands of years to recuperate her mental power. The total time that the god of light has been awake and alive is only over 50,000 years, which can actually be regarded as a very senior little goddess of over 50,000 years old. Such a goddess has such an innocent, sweet, and girlish face. When she does such actions, she only feels cute and does not feel disobedient. Even to Lin, it gave him a vague feeling that she was still practicing in the Dashi dynasty in the mortal world. The innocent girl tilted her head slightly and said to him briskly, "The water god is already a young man. I don't think he likes rattles anymore. Then I will make him a crossbow. Do you agree?" Lin looked at her, suppressed the thoughts in his heart, and tried his best to smile. "The best crossbowman in the world is your superior. The water god will definitely cherish the crossbow made by your superior." She pursed her lips and smiled, her happiness visible to the naked eye. "That's good," she whispered. "Let's stop talking about the pleasant things." She stopped and looked at the three people standing in front of her. "Now I want to get down to business." The three of them looked at each other, and then all looked at Zhu Ti. She was still very gentle, and her voice was even as soft as before, but what she said firmly fixed the three of them in place. She said, "Has Qing Jiang returned? I dreamed that he killed me, just when I was about to sacrifice for Ba Huang again." End of Chapter 2 Book 3.